I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's September 10th, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm sure I don't have to remind anyone who's listening to this podcast that living with MS is expensive. A recent study funded by the National MS Society found that the average cost of living with MS in the United States is $88,487 a year. Even with insurance, that can turn out to be a heavy lift. And one thing you don't need is to be worrying about money while you're already worrying about MS. So when I think about talking about budgeting and managing your personal finances if you're living with MS, I think we're really talking about preserving your quality of life. Joining me to help us avoid that additional anxiety with some strategies for budgeting and managing debt is the Senior Vice President of Membership and Media Relations at the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, Bruce McClary. But before we get to my conversation with Bruce, there are a few other things that you should know about. Last week, an updated Pathways to Cures research roadmap was published. This updated version reflects the scientific progress that's been made in understanding multiple sclerosis and the issues that were identified and discussed during the Pathways to Cures Global Summit, which took place in May 2023. If you missed our coverage of what was a historic meeting, I'll recommend that you check out episodes 297 and 298 of Real Talk MS, and you'll find links to both those episodes in today's show notes. As many of you know, the Pathways to Cures research roadmap identifies 3 goals: stopping MS, restoring lost function, and ending MS forever. And this latest iteration of the research roadmap takes into account the advances in MS research that have been made since the original roadmap was published, and it identifies new research opportunities that will bring us closer to achieving each of those 3 goals. The updated roadmap also identifies some of the foundational factors that will accelerate research progress, including lowering barriers to global data sharing, enhancing collaboration, committing to sustained funding, engaging regulators, insurance companies, and other payers to ensure everyone has access to research breakthroughs, continuing to engage people affected by MS in every aspect of research, and committing to health equity and inclusion in the global MS movement. During the Pathways to Cures Global Summit, MS organizations from Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the MS International Federation declared their commitment to create a collaboration framework and to work together to accelerate progress. The first part of that commitment was commissioning a study of the global MS research funding landscape to get a better understanding of what research is currently being funded by governments and MS advocacy organizations everywhere. This landscape study was also published last week, highlighting a worldwide MS research portfolio of more than 2,300 research projects valued at more than $500 million. Of these 2,300 research projects, just 272 were co-funded, meaning there's a huge opportunity for greater research collaboration. Organizations like the International Progressive MS Alliance and the Global PROMS Initiative are shining examples of the progress that can be made through collaboration. Of the 2,300 research projects currently underway, 60% fell under the Stop MS category, 31% were categorized under Restore Lost Function, and 8% were classified as falling under the End MS category. That heavy concentration in the STOP category reflects the emphasis on stopping MS progression as a primary strategy. I'm certain that through global collaboration, there can be a consolidation of redundant research projects and perhaps a somewhat better balancing and effort between the 3 Pathways to Cures goals. You know, I try to leave my opinion out of these reports, but I've always believed that the Pathways to Cures initiative is historic, and I don't think we can overestimate its importance. We'll be talking more about this latest version of the Pathways to Cures research roadmap, and we'll continue following the progress being made in this unprecedented global collaborative strategy to stop MS, restore lost function, and end MS forever. You can find links to the updated Pathways to Cures research roadmap and the Global MS Research Funding Landscape Study, both in today's show notes. In last week's episode, we shared the good news from Sanofi about the results of the Phase 3 clinical trials for Fenebrutinib, an experimental disease-modifying therapy that represents a new category of medication called BTK inhibitors. This week, drug manufacturer Roche is reporting positive results from the open-label extension of the Phase 2 clinical trial for their BTK inhibitor, Fenebrutinib. The data from this study show that after 1 year, Fenebrutinib was shown to be safe and it almost entirely suppressed all signs of disease activity, including relapses, disability progression, and brain lesions in people with relapsing forms of MS. Details from this study will be announced in Copenhagen at ECTRIMS, the largest MS research conference in the world, and you can expect to hear ECTRIMS updates on Real Talk MS before the conference even ends. Sexual dysfunction is a symptom of MS that isn't discussed as often as it should be. The reality is that sexual dysfunction is a symptom, just like fatigue or depression, that can have a damaging effect on quality of life and a person's sense of emotional well-being. Results from a small study in Greece suggest that transcutaneous tibial nerve stimulation, or TTNS, can improve sexual dysfunction in men and women with MS. Transcutaneous tibial nerve stimulation may sound complex, but it's a non-invasive procedure where mild electrical impulses are applied to the tibial nerve, which is located near the ankle and connected to the pelvic region. This same treatment has been shown to be effective in helping people with MS manage an overactive bladder. This study involved 40 adults with MS who were divided into two groups. One group received TTNS, and the other group received a sham treatment that did not involve real nerve stimulation. The participants in each of the groups were similar in terms of sex, age, and disease activity. All of the participants identified as white, cisgender, and heterosexual, except for one participant who identified as gay. All of the study participants attended 3 20-minute sessions each week over a period of 2 months. The study participants' sexual function was evaluated using the standard MS Intimacy and Sexuality Questionnaire, which is designed to rate how MS interferes with sexual activity or satisfaction. This questionnaire assesses 3 domains of sexual dysfunction. Primary sexual dysfunction is dysfunction directly caused by nerve damage from MS. Secondary sexual dysfunction is caused by MS-related changes that indirectly affect sexual response, like fatigue. And tertiary sexual dysfunction is disability-related issues like depression or lowered self-esteem that can interfere with sexual feelings and sexual response. The results of this study showed that after 2 months, the group of study participants who actually received transcutaneous tibial nerve stimulation showed significant improvement. The results showed that sexual interest and pleasure experienced from orgasms had significantly improved. Men in the group had better erectile function, while women experienced better vaginal lubrication. Study participants in this group also reported improved bladder control. When you're experiencing symptoms of multiple sclerosis, sexual dysfunction may not seem high on your list. But when you begin to consider the emotional and psychological aspects of sexual dysfunction, it's probably something that ought not be ignored. If your neurologist isn't asking about changes in your sexual function, perhaps you should be the one starting that conversation. If you'd like to learn more about this particular study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. By now, I hope you've heard the loud and clear message that exercise and physical activity is beneficial to everyone with MS, at every level of ability. And while the research and messaging makes clear that exercise delivers benefits no matter your level of ability, what about your age? Well, an analysis of data collected from 12 previous clinical trials shows that resistance training is beneficial to middle-aged people who are living with MS. Resistance training, like weightlifting, involves activities designed to increase muscle strength and improve endurance. The 12 clinical trials included in this analysis involved a total of 459 people with MS, with an average age just over 49 and a half years old. 6 of these studies compared resistance training to usual care, while the other 6 studies compared resistance training to other types of physical activity, like treadmill training or stretching. The results of this analysis showed that resistance training improved muscle strength, and resistance training combined with other types of training was also associated with improvements in gait. If you're living with MS and you think that exercise is something for younger people, I hope you'll reevaluate that opinion. The evidence suggests that even at the age of 50, resistance training can deliver some specific benefits, along with that non-specific but important feeling of greater well-being. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. We're exactly 8 weeks away from Election Day in the United States, and I hope 100% of my listeners in America are planning to vote, either in person or by mail. Now, I'm not into endorsing any specific candidate on this podcast, but I am deeply committed to identifying candidates who have come out in favor or in opposition to the laws that protect and preserve the rights of people who are living with MS. In this year's presidential election, one of the candidates has not only spoken out against the Affordable Care Act, but while in office, they came within a single vote in the Senate of eliminating the Affordable Care Act. This is the law that, among many other things, guarantees that everyone can obtain health insurance regardless of any pre-existing conditions, like multiple sclerosis. I'm not sure how many of you ever experienced trying to find health insurance coverage before the Affordable Care Act became law. It was as close to impossible as is possible. And that very limited coverage that was offered came with astronomically high premiums. Now, I've heard some people say that the Affordable Care Act is not popular. The evidence says otherwise. Today, 45 million Americans are enrolled in coverage related to the Affordable Care Act. Now, this is completely separate from the Americans who get their health care coverage through their own or a spouse's employer-provided health insurance, or who get their coverage through Medicare. Since the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, the number of uninsured Americans has been cut in half. And if you're wondering who's actually benefiting from the Affordable Care Act, Americans most likely to take advantage of this coverage include self-employed entrepreneurs, people who work in industries that are less likely to offer healthcare coverage, like food service and construction, part-time workers, gig workers like your Uber or Lyft driver, people who retire before they become eligible for Medicare at the age of 65, and people with low incomes. That covers a lot of ground. And if anyone from either political party has a better plan to replace the Affordable Care Act, I'm all for it. But so far, that better plan has never been introduced. So I hope you'll vote your own self-interest and support the candidates that are supporting you and your family. If it sounds like I hold strong opinions about this, it's not because I'm particularly partisan, but as someone who went broke managing my wife's MS care, and that was with good health insurance, I'll add, I know how expensive MS care can be. Access to quality, affordable health care should be a right and not a privilege. And I don't want anyone to go back to a time when you received a letter telling you that you don't qualify for health care coverage because of a pre-existing condition. If you're planning to vote in person, access to your polling place can sometimes be challenging. That's why the National MS Society is hosting a webinar featuring guest speaker Michelle Bishop of the National Disability Rights Network. Michelle will share her expertise in voting accessibility as well as share some insights on current election laws and strategies to help you effectively navigate the process of casting your vote. The webinar takes place next week on National Voter Registration Day, September 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register online for the Voting Without Barriers webinar, and you'll find that link in today's show notes. Having just referenced the high cost of MS care, it feels like the ideal time to introduce my guest. In a moment, you'll meet the Senior Vice President of Membership and Media Relations at the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, Bruce McClary. And Bruce is coming armed with tips and strategies to help get your household budget under control. MS is expensive. A recent study funded by the National MS Society found the average cost of living with MS to be $88,487 a year. And when MS can sometimes impact an individual's ability to work or reduce a two-income family to a single-income family, creating a budget becomes not only a money management strategy, it becomes a strategy for preserving your quality of life. Bruce McClary, the Senior Vice President of Membership and Media Relations at the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, is joining me today to discuss the how-tos of budgeting when you're living with MS. Welcome to the podcast, Bruce.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
I know that for a lot of people, creating a budget may be a new idea. So let's start with a couple of basics. What is a budget, and what are the benefits of having a budget?
A budget is a very basic financial plan that outlines your expected income and expenses over a specific period, and it can help you accomplish a few very essential things as you think about where you are and where you want to go. It helps you first and foremost track your spending, and that's very important because if you're tracking your spending, there's no question about how you got where you are. If you're keeping track of the details of your spending. I mean, you don't have to be microscopic and track every penny, but it's really a good idea to kind of more broadly identify your areas of spending and what you're spending, and also counter that with whatever income you have to balance that out. And then by doing that, you can identify areas where you can make adjustments. And people like to use the word cuts. Well, that sounds painful, right? So I say adjustments because, again, a budget is a living, breathing thing, and it changes based on your life circumstances, your needs, your goals. So you can make adjustments today that you might be able to reverse in a few months or a year or even sooner. So that these tracking your spending helps you identify areas where you can make these adjustments. And it also helps you make room for savings. And there's that golden rule of pay yourself first. Savings is very important, not only for future goals, but also for emergencies, unexpected expenses, helping you avoid going into debt because you'll have the money to take care of some unexpected expenses that may come up from time to time. So those are all the things that you can do with a budget. And that's essentially what a budget is.
I have a two-part question for you. Are there any specific factors that people living with MS should keep in mind when they're making a budget? And because MS can be so unpredictable, how should someone go about creating a budget that accounts for potential future medical expense?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, all too often, people under many different circumstances who are facing the prospect of ongoing long-term medical care and changing medical needs are faced with this dilemma about how to accurately plan for the changes that life has in store and how that impacts their finances. And there's no such thing as a crystal ball. So I don't think that's really the expectation you should set for yourself when putting together a budget and considering what MS means within the spectrum of that budget and how to appropriately prepare. So I think one of the things that you can do to help yourself in this endeavor is to recognize the fact that while you can't accurately predict what your future will be, you can look at all of the different scenarios that might play out and how those will impact your budget. So fluctuating medical costs based on different outcomes and different tracks of treatment and medical care that may be ahead of you. And to learn more about what that may look like, again, that involves talking to your medical care provider, talking to healthcare professionals, understanding what your future looks like and what your care may look like and what those costs may be as your needs change under varying degrees of scenarios. And then you can more accurately map out how you might respond to those changes. And it gives you an opportunity as well to research the different resources that are available to help you fill the gaps. If there are insurance coverage gaps, if your income doesn't necessarily look like it'll be keeping up with those changes in your out-of-pocket costs, it gives you an opportunity to learn about the resources before it comes time to actually push the button and execute a plan where you have to utilize those resources. So I think those are things that you might want to consider as you sit down to budget. This is very different from someone who is in other circumstances where their healthcare needs may be different. But again, I think just running through scenarios and learning more about what the different outcomes may be gives you that adaptability, that flexibility, and that ability to act with certainty as changes happen that impact your budget.
When we talk about money management in general, another term we often hear is financial planning. So is there a difference between budgeting and financial planning? And if there is, which is more beneficial for someone who's living with MS?
Yeah, it's good to know that budgeting is a starting point, and I think because budgeting is a starting point, it helps to point out that it's a short-term plan focusing on managing monthly income and expenses. But there's obviously something beyond budgeting that exists, and I think financial planning helps fill that gap because that's about long-term strategies for achieving financial goals. Including retirement, healthcare, estate planning, all of these things that are in the long-term plan for you. Budgeting helps you in the moment and in the short term, in the near term. But financial planning helps you address some of those things that are further afield. And I think both are essential. They work hand in hand. But financial planning is particularly important for people with MS to ensure long-term financial security.
Sometimes the most challenging aspect of creating a budget is just getting started. Are there any resources that might make it easier for someone to get started on that budget?
Yeah, this reminds me of every dental visit I've ever had where they say you need to floss more, you need to be more regular with brushing, et cetera. Budgeting falls in that same category. Financial experts can tell you to budget regularly, to pay attention to all the details. But oftentimes, if you're not doing it regularly, the sticking point is about knowing where to start and where the resources are, and that sometimes keeps people from even beginning the process of putting together a budget and tracking expenses. So there are tools that make it easy, that make it easier, and they're readily available. And oftentimes, some of these tools are free. Some of them can be found online or in app stores in your Android or Apple App Store. We all know that Mint was taken off the market earlier this year. It was highly recommended and loved, but it's gone. So now we have to look at what's out there to replace Mint. I think one of the most closely aligned options that's very Mint-like is something called You Need a Budget, YNAB. And it's a very effective online budgeting tool that helps you through some of these challenges that you may have in getting started with a budget, making the process approachable, simplifying the process, and getting what you need out of it. And there are also other tools as well. There are some that are available at my organization. If you go to nfcc.org, under resources, we have an online budgeting tool. And there's also a budgeting tool called Pocket Guard. So again, you can go online, you can search for these, but as you're looking for these, just make sure that you're protecting yourself. If you're using an online service, make sure your data, your personal information is secure, because you don't want to be putting personal information, especially information linked to your finances, in the wrong hands.
Well, let's say that someone is creating a budget for themselves and they realize that their expenses are higher than their income. How do they fix that? What are some ways that they can reduce those expenses?
Yeah, there's certainly good places to start. And I'm not going to be one of those who starts with the worn out, outdated advice of stop buying lattes or things like that. But that, that misguided advice actually does touch on an area where you might want to look first, and that's your areas of non-essential spending, discretionary spending that you have. There's often room there. If you're sitting down for the first time with your budget and you're looking for areas of flexibility, that's where I would go. And again, I'm not telling people to make life completely unenjoyable and engage in some exercise of extreme self-deprivation by cutting out discretionary expenses. But again, you have necessities and you have things that are in other categories. You don't want to cut your necessities first. You want to look at non-essential spending. And hopefully your circumstances can improve in a way that allows you, if you do have to adjust your non-essential spending to downsize it, you may be able to start building those categories back up at a later date once you become more financially stable and move beyond any kind of financial setback. So I'd say non-essential spending first, and negotiate your bills. For goodness sake, too few people reach out to their creditors, to their lenders, and to their utility billers to have conversations about how to make those obligations more affordable. And options do exist. You just need to pick up the phone and be proactive and ask to identify where those are. Utility companies have hardship programs that are available. They also have payment plans that are 12-month payment plans to even out some of the variable expenses that are associated with utilities that are seasonal, like getting your heating oil tank filled, for example. So there are all kinds of creative options with your utility companies. Creditors, lenders have temporary hardship programs that might allow you to skip payments without penalty as you resolve some temporary financial setbacks. Those are things that you can find out more about if you pick up the phone or if you go on email or chat in a secure chat environment with your creditor, your lender, or your utility provider. And then, of course, you can always go back to some of the age-old advice about finding more affordable alternatives for goods and services, using coupons and discounts, considering downsizing your housing situation if you're looking to find significant room in your budget. And then, of course, exploring assistance options through nonprofit organizations and maybe even government assistance programs.
Unfortunately, when you're living with MS, it's easy to accumulate substantial medical debt and even high credit card debt. What are some strategies to manage high debt while still planning for your ongoing medical needs?
There are a number of different options that may be available based on the amount of debt you owe and how, the status of that debt, if you're able to keep up with the payments or if you're already falling behind. I think if you're still paying as agreed and if you're able to keep up with the payments and it hasn't yet become a budget crisis, you may be able to work with your lenders, your creditors to more affordably restructure the debt through refinancing. To make those payments a little bit easier on your budget, to relieve some of that budgetary pressure as your medical expenses increase. Now, we know that option may not be available to everybody. Refinancing requires qualifying credit. So you may not have the best credit score, or you may already be starting to fall behind. But in lieu of that, you can also try some other options. Like self-service, like DIY options, like creating an accelerated payment plan that gets you beyond minimum payments, or reorganizing your budget to make those debt payments a little bit more affordable. But if you need help and you're falling behind, it's very important to know that nonprofit credit counseling agencies can help you. And there are NFCC certified credit counselors who can provide advice and guidance and help you find the most suitable solution if your debt is increasingly unaffordable and you're falling behind. So look for an NFCC certified nonprofit credit counselor, and you can find them by visiting nfcc.org. And even if you don't decide to go through a specific debt management plan that reduces your interest, lowers your fees, reduces your payments and makes it more affordable to repay the debt, the counselor can be helpful in selecting some suitable options that you can try on your own, like some of these restructuring plans that you can put together with your budget, or refinancing options that are available with your creditors.
I'm glad you brought up working with a nonprofit NFCC certified credit counselor. Can you talk a little bit more about what that individual does, how they might be helpful to someone?
Yes. Well, as a starting point, I think the experience for those who reach out to a credit counselor starts with a confidential discussion with the counselor about the financial challenges that you're facing, the budget that you have in front of you, your expenses, your income, and the goals that you have for yourself. But the priority of a financial counselor is to help review your budget, your current circumstances, and then using their expertise, provide options that are suitable for your circumstances and explain those options so that you can make an informed decision for yourself about what is best as a next step. And in some cases, you may benefit from a debt management plan that's administered by a nonprofit credit counseling agency. And these plans that are offered by NFCC agencies give you an opportunity to benefit from reduced payments to your creditors and lower interest rate and lower fees. And this is primarily for credit card debt, unsecured debt that's non-collateralized. So we're not talking about your auto loan or your home loan. And in some cases, even medical bills can go into debt management programs if they're past due and they've gone into collections. So there are definitely ways that you can benefit from talking to a nonprofit credit counselor, understanding what affordable repayment options exist. And if you are falling behind on your obligations and some of your debts have gone into collections, whether they're your credit cards or your medical debt, these plans that may be available through NFCC agencies are a great thing to consider to get you back on track. Usually these plans complete in about 4 or 5 years on average. So if you think about being debt-free in 4 or 5 years and imagine how that might impact how you manage your other obligations like ongoing health care and other budget items, there certainly is a benefit in circumstances where that is a suitable option.
And tell us again, what's the best way to find a nonprofit NFCC certified credit counselor?
You can go online to nfcc.org. That's nfcc.org, or you can call toll-free 1-800-388-2227. That's 1-800-388-2227. And going either direction will help connect you with an NFCC certified nonprofit credit counselor.
Well, Bruce McClary, thank you for sharing some important strategies that can keep someone from experiencing the added stress of managing high debt when they're already managing multiple sclerosis. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me, John.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/367. You'll find that link in today's show notes so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes. And it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.